conversations about life, family, and business with your host, Eric. Whether you're looking for practical advice, personal stories, or just a little inspiration, Eric's got you covered. Tune in every week to join the journey and get ready to elevate your game. Now, here's your host, Eric.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of the Eric's Podcast. I'm your host, Eric, and today I am joined by Anna Maria DiDio, who is an adoptive mother and was inspired to write her memoir, Love at the Border, and an adoption adventure after her family journey to Mexico. Now, her life adventure children's books features stories about adoption, foster care, and stepchildren, and in all blended families. She is an award-winning author and loves this whole mission on adoption. Thank you for joining us. How are you doing today?
Oh, great. Thank you for having me.
So what we like to do at the beginning of the show is we like to ask, was there anything that you found entertaining or funny happened to you this past week?
Funny or entertaining? Well, just a week ago, I played basketball in college and we had our reunion. So I got to see a lot of my teammates and from when I played a million years ago and see how much the sport has changed. So that was really fun and entertaining. So I enjoyed it.
Did you guys play a full game or was it like horse or?
Well, it's interesting. We used to play a full game, and then over the years, the alumni participants just have kind of drifted off, and now no one wants to play a game. So we just go to the current varsity game and cheer the team on.
Oh, that's fun. That's fun. I love that. Yeah, the last time I did sports, it was ultimate frisbee, and I did not stretch beforehand. I never needed to stretch. That was never an issue. And I'm playing with these 18 and 20-year-olds. And and I still gave it my all. Like, I still outpaced them. But boy, did I have issues for a month in terms of soreness in my legs and my knees. I was like, what is happening right now?
Yeah.
It's still right now, I still have an issue with my knee. I still have to stretch it. And it's just like, good grief, Eric, what's happening? So, tell me a little bit about your story and passion for adoption and a little bit of the history for you and how you got into it.
Well, let's see where to begin. When we were married, I knew that I had infertility issues. And so after, some years actually of treatments and intervention, we had a beautiful baby girl. But then adding to our family was not happening, was not possible. And so we began to look into adoption. We actually thought that adoption would be in our world the first time around. But then once we started the treatments, then I did get pregnant. But then the second time was just not happening. So we looked into, we explored many avenues of adoption and ultimately decided on a path that led us to Mexico. And we adopted a 6-year-old girl from a shelter in Cuernavaca, Mexico. So
what are the different avenues? Because I don't know anything about it, and I know that there's not a lot of people that know a lot about it. But I always thought that it was like you contact an agency and then they, I don't know, do their process or whatever, and you get to choose from three kids or something like that.
Well, I mean, you're on sort of the right track. The first thing that a family should decide is an international or domestic adoption. So international adoptions have really fallen off in the last either 10 years or so, just due to the problems, not only political issues, but there's been a lot of fraud in the process where the children were declared orphans, but then were not really orphans. And so there's been a lot of issues, but it was a decision that we made to go international after we had looked into a number of possibilities, even foster to adopt. As a matter of fact, foster to adopt is one of the leading avenues to creating a family today. So family, familiar, family adoption, foster children. So that's what's happening today. So it was quite an adventure, and I kept a journal. And then after I left the corporate world, I decided to take all those notes and write a memoir and think about the experience. But, what led to the children's books was really the message that I hope to convey, with my books, because every adoption begins with trauma. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the process, but just thinking about an infant or a child being separated from the world they know, or the mother that created them, that's in and of itself a form of trauma known as the primal wound. So as the experience, back to us and the experience of adopting our 6-year-old daughter, to me, what her behavior and her, I thought everything would be so wonderful. She wanted a family. We wanted another child. And she cried and cried for months. And at the time, I just didn't realize all that she had lost. And so going back to this question, this concept of trauma made me want to research it and talk about that in a way that would be productive for other adoptive families. So that's why I decided to write the children's books.
So, in your profile description, you mentioned you have a BA in psychology. Do you think that helped you in trying to understand her processes and kind of what she's going through in a way?
But yes, because my corporate career was in human resources, and it was I thought sort of a natural outgrowth of some of my interest in psychology and human behavior. But it was really her behavior that was prompting me to look into this more. And this is, some 20 years ago. And the concept of adoption trauma, I think, was just beginning to be understood and written about. And so when I had got my hands on that book called Primal Wound by Nancy Verrier, some of your those in the adoption community are familiar with it, but perhaps your listeners won't. But it explains the kinds of behavior adoptive families will see that is conveying that trauma. And I was seeing that when I read the book, a light bulb went off that this is the reason she was acting the way that she was acting. It was the trauma speaking to us. And she needed time and understanding and compassion and above all, knowledgeable parents that we knew where this was coming from. So my thought was that the best way to communicate this to other adoptive families would be through the children's books.
Yeah, and I can imagine that the children could also read them and understand more about what's going on within them also, because a lot of the times kids, especially really young ones, don't fully know the emotion or how to address whatever this bundle of emotions are. At least that's right. One of the, for my 3-year-old, and now, well, the 1-year-old can't talk yet. Once they can talk, it's a little bit easier. But our 3-year-old, we're having to do that all the time in terms of being there with them, but also trying to help them navigate through some of the emotions so they don't get all bundled up and then he doesn't know what to do and he starts to spiral.
Right.
Did you notice the spiraling effect that can happen
Yes.
here?
Yeah, and there were certain triggers, and you hit upon something very, very significant in that the children are having these thoughts and thinking, perhaps I'm being disloyal to my adoptive family. There's, fear of abandonment, fear of losing the love that is shown to them as an adoptive child. So they're leery. They're very they're in their minds. They're questioning why they're having all these thoughts. And that's, again, you hit upon something so important, because one of the things I want to convey with the stories is that it's so normal for these children to have these thoughts and perhaps act out in this way. The questions in my second children's book is called How I Wonder Where You Are. And it's it's not about my daughter specifically, because she would kill me if I wrote any more about her. So she said, no more writing TMI, Mom. So it's about a girl, Carla, who was adopted from Colombia. And, these are the things that my daughter went through. So all of the books were inspired by our actual family events. And she's asking, where did I come from? Who do I look like? What's my creation story? Why do I, act the way they do, with certain gestures or, in my daughter's case and in the book, we had a biological child and an adopted child. And there are so many times that people would say that my biological daughter, oh, she looks so much like you. Well, that's a sad thought for the adopted child that doesn't look like the family. So it's normal to wonder and ask all of these questions, and parents should sort of welcome it and take it as an opportunity to discuss adoption and share as much of the birth story as possible. So
As they know,
so I'm a real advocate of, open and honest communication and telling the adoption story to a child even before the concept, of adoption is understood. So just begin with that story. Each child deserves to have his or her own story, front and center, in their lives from the beginning.
do they does the adoption agency, do they give you that information?
What do you mean about the birth?
Yeah, like the birth, the details around it.
Well, we did not receive any details. So, but
Okay.
she had spent 6 years in an orphanage. And when you say that word, they also use the term shelter. But when you say those words, perhaps certain things come to mind, but that was not the case. I mean, we did visit the shelter, and it was a very loving and wonderful environment. The women that cared for the children had just love in their hearts and really would do anything for them. So it was sort of a double dose of trauma for my daughter, and that she had become accustomed to this wonderful sort of that their family.
It wasn't like you were rescuing her from a bad situation kind of thing.
Exactly. So, but that's what people like to think about adoption, that these children are so lucky. In fact, people told us many times, oh, she's so lucky to have you, as you're such a great family. She's so lucky to have you. And I just really hate that phrase. I hate that thought about adoption, that children are lucky, because, she went to sleep in Mexico one evening, and then the next night she was in suburban Philadelphia, and in a whole new house and family. not knowing a word of English. So it's often referred to, as the myth of adoption. And this is something that we learn very well in the entertainment world. Oh, the orphans in the entertainment world are saved by these aunts or uncles or other adoptive families. And there's no recognition of this trauma that is present in their lives for many years.
So, I guess my question is would you, um, with such an opening and nice environment or orphanage, would you suggest it would be better to go to adopt from a place that is not so nice? Just out of curiosity. Like,
Well,
what would,
there's so many, yeah, the circumstances for international adoptions now are so, unique and different and changed. So, so many countries have just shut down those opportunities. So
oh, okay. So it's harder, is what you're
yeah,
saying. Oh, mm.
but the concept of adoption and the trauma that I'm talking about exists, whether it's, from bad circumstances to, even a family adoption is traumatic because of, that genetic connection, that the family connection is still there, but questions need to be answered, and children deserve to know what their circumstances are.
You mentioned before that you had worked in corporate. Were you doing all of this at the same time as you were working?
What, writing the books, you mean?
No, going through the adoption process.
Oh, yeah. Yes. That was because they're only a year apart, but they were 2 years apart in school. So when we were, looking to have a child, and then we were successful and had our baby girl, then when it was clear that we were not able to have another child, that took a while, and researching the infertility treatments took some time, and then researching what possibilities existed for adoption. So by then, our daughter was 6, 7 years old. So we thought the time for an infant was sort of passed us by. So we got into what were opportunities for adopting an older child. And that's when it just so happened I saw an article about children from Mexico coming from a summer camp locally. And the article stated that the children were eligible for adoption. So you could see by the photo that they were very similar to our daughter's age, so that we looked into it. And that was
Is
where
that what
we
led
ended.
you to go over to Mexico, and that's what inspired Love at the Border?
Yes.
That's cool. Yeah. What particularly in that journey to Mexico, what did you see that really hit home for you when you came back to the States that inspired this book?
Well, I think the experience, we took 3 trips to Mexico. So we had a chance to really, get to know a little bit about the country, and we've been back many times. So I think that's also part 2 of this question. So I knew that this, in meeting the women who were the director of the shelter and the caregivers there, it was such a unique experience, and they cared so much about the children. It really prompted me to write about it. So I kept a journal, and then through the years, once the adoption happened, I continued with the journal. And it wasn't until I left the corporate world that I decided to really put the time in to write it. But the 3 trips to Mexico convinced me that her culture and her heritage was so important, and we were kind of determined to keep that as part of her life. And initially, of course, when we returned from Mexico, she lost her Spanish. And that was always something that she wanted, that she was sad about. So we did hire, tutors and try to encourage her to learn Spanish again. But it wasn't until she had some, uh, that it was in the curriculum in middle school. So middle school started, Spanish instruction again at her elementary school. And it just started coming back to her. And then by high school and of course college, she was with her uh, I guess she was determined. With her determination is a good word. She reclaimed Spanish, and she's fluent, and she uses it in her career currently.
So going back to the not the process, but after the adoption, after everything happened, your first year, and you realize the emotional trauma that was in the middle of happening, and you said sick. Yeah, so that's a lot that's a lot for her to unpack. But you mentioned the different processes and how you mentioned international is harder now. Is that right? So if a family was thinking about adoption today, would you recommend foster care, or what would you recommend?
Well, every adoption is unique. Is another saying that I've been reading about, and just of course being interested in a lot of adoption stories. I've discovered that families come to that decision through many different paths. So it would be kind of difficult for me to recommend. It really depends, on the family, and their current. Do they have children already? What ages are they, and what are their resources? Adoption is very expensive. There are agencies that you can apply for grants to help with the process. But it certainly hasn't gotten any easier over the years. For instance, I know the requirements in Mexico now are quite different, and there is a residency requirement, and I'm not quite sure the length of time, but you really have to make a commitment to be here and getting to know the child through a period of time. So, but I also mentioned, many countries are now closed, so it has become more restrictive, and the domestic opportunities, the foster to adopt situations have become more prevalent in the U.S.
What would you say to a couple that has 2 kids and are looking to adopt? What would you say to them? Well, let's take my own for example. I have a 1-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old son. What would we want to be thinking about?
Well, you'd want to be
not
thinking
knowing
about
anything.
Not knowing anything. So yeah, my best answer is really to connect with professionals. There are so many adoption agencies out there that have coaches and therapists and counselors that can really guide a family to the decision that's appropriate for them, and involve, even though your children are very young, involve them and make the best decision overall. And really, what is your family situation, your parenting styles, there's so many things that come into play, but connecting with professionals. And then another thing I recommend is really networking with other adoptive families. So seeing how adoption has played out in perhaps families in your local neighborhood or church or professional group or whatever, there's always a chance to connect with these folks. And whether that be a single parent or a 2-parent family, just see how they've adapted, what decisions they made. I found that very helpful.
How did your, speaking of the kids, how did your own daughter take it over the years? But I imagine it would be somewhat of a little bit of an emotional ride for her also in her own experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Great question, because she had been an only child
Yeah.
for almost 8 years. And so she had a couple of, breakdown moments where she tearfully would come to me. She's getting all the attention because everything was focused on this little kid who couldn't speak English and needed to learn how to eat in the U.S. and live in a house. And,
Mm.
everything was so different for her. And, as I said, we really didn't take the time to process how big of a change that was. But, gradually we lived in a very small community that was super supportive. She, um, bonded, connected very well. I don't know if they call it ESL anymore, but her English teacher, her English as a second language teacher at school, they formed a great relationship. That woman helped her through many grades and tests. And as I said, the community was small, and she made friends. She's such an outgoing and social kid. She made friends, and so every situation's different, and the resources needed are different. But keeping in touch with other adoptive families and keeping those professionals close at hand is a very wise move.
How long did it take everybody to kind of adjust after that first year and the roller coaster that everybody went on?
Oh,
I know it's
years.
different for everybody, but
It was really a process because as she grew, her questions and her challenges, changed.
Mhm.
And as she understood kind of the enormity of what was happening, I think in the beginning, well, it took really many weeks. I think for a while, she thought she was going to be returning to Mexico. And when that wasn't happening, um, it was just a very gradual process. And there would be, 2 steps forward, 10 steps back, and that kind of thing. But
how do
we try.
you, um, what, it's not really a backspace, but going back to those questions of, a long time thing that she would return back to Mexico. How did you as a parent actually address those to ensure her that no, you're not, no, you're not? Because I know with my 3-year-old, he'll get into this thing where he'll tell himself the answer, even though we are there telling him something else, but he's telling himself the same thing. The answer, like, I'll never be able to do this. And it's like, no, you'll be able to do it. Look, just keep trying. We'll figure it out. How did you as a parent address that all those different times?
Well, initially, we had some very supportive words from the women that helped to raise her at the shelter, at the orphanage. So we had some phone calls with them, and they affirmed their love and support, but that she would be living with us. And it was really a matter of trying to establish consistency as a family. Um,
Uh,
we did things together. On my website, I have a couple resources for things that we turn to in our time, and that was I have a fun sheet, an affirmation sheet, which is kids taking the opportunity to affirm positivity and love, and so that's it's kind of it's a list of positive affirmations for kids, and then they can write their own and draw their own. And so that's on my website if you sign up for my newsletter. And we also did things together. There are recipes also on the website. We took the time to do fun things together, and not just vacations, but baking, and it was always important to have dinner together. So we tried to just maintain a consistent family presence and the girls support each other in terms of they both took ballet lessons, and they went to the same school for a number of years, and then went to different high schools. But the community, as I mentioned, was very supportive, and we were very involved in the community.
Okay, so what does the future hold for you and your family now, going forward? Are you going to write some more books, or you have some more ideas?
Yes, I've transitioned to middle grade books. So now I'm writing a series about a girl who is very book smart, but has trouble making friends. And she meets a boy named Andy, and he's adopted, and he wants to have, her name is Grace, and he wants Grace to help him find his birth mother. So he was adopted in secret, which is a parent's prerogative to have a private or a private adoption, but he wants answers. So I thought it would be better to tell a story, and perhaps, again, these thoughts that kids have questioning their adoption story, where they came from, who they look like. And the book is for age 8 to 12. And so by that point, if they're articulating these questions, these books are really an invitation for parents to open the conversation. And that's really what the 3 children's books, they're age 4 to 8. And that's really what those children's books are about. And they're all inspired by our actual family events. But I'm writing this new series about Grace, and I've launched the first one in October, and then the next couple of ones will be coming out in the spring.
What's the name of the series?
This will be a blended series. The first book in this blended family series is called Grace's Right Time, but WRITE, right? So she likes to write in her journal, and she likes to write letters to kind of understand what's happening to her and her family. So,
and what is the main takeaway that the viewers should take from this episode?
The understanding that adoption begins with trauma, but it's something that if parents are aware and can engage children around the discussion, be as open as possible. And it's my hope that all realizing this, that blended families will thrive and grow in love.
And also to not be afraid to adopt because of the trauma, right? Like if that shouldn't stop you, that there is a way to navigate through it.
Yes. And my information, all this information can be found on my website, and that's amdidio.com. That's amdidio.com. In fact, one of my books is a read aloud experience on the website. So if you want to try that out and see what one of my children's books, the one I mentioned, How I Wonder Where You Are, that's read by Snuggle Stories, and has a little animation and some music, and it's on my website. But
awesome.
My news, yeah.
Anna Maria, thank you so much for joining us. This was a great episode. Hopefully we'll get you back on when you have your series is finished. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Welcome to Eric's podcast. Dive into conversations about life, family, and business with your host, Eric. Whether you're looking for practical advice, personal stories, or just a little inspiration, Eric's got you covered. Tune in every week to join the journey and get ready to elevate your game.